for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
S-I-C-K.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. With Tony Marinaro.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur. Oh!
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
You're in the ball!
Sports entertainment like no other.
Rejoint, on lui fait perdre la rondelle, une passe devant. Et c'est le dégagement et ce sera la victoire des Canadiens. Stanley pour les Canadiens, leur 23e de l'histoire.
You found the dogs! John, you found the dogs! He found the dogs! And all together, they worked a young team to the top. And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. La Vida Tibi. Embrace your true nature. And Playground, your premier gaming destination. It's gonna be sick.
Marinaro, the Sick Podcast. Thanks for watching, everyone, on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter Live. And the Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, a leading full-service logistics provider, serving all of North America, driven to be different. Also brought to you by Tibi. They've launched their new Ultra Lager, a refreshing, thirst-quenching beer, perfect for the hot summer days, with only 90 calories, 2 grams of carbs, 4% ABV per can, available in packets 6 and 12 in grocery stores all around the province of Quebec. Ultra light and ultra refreshing. Also, Playground. Play the lucky numbers at Playground. Earn your entries daily and return every Sunday for a chance to win a share of the $15,000 in cash prizes with a $5,000 top prize. And on July 28, one lucky winner will take home $10,000 at the $30,000 finale. Visit playground.ca for details. All right. The NHL draft was almost 2 weeks ago. And by now, Scott Wheeler of The Athletic has had a chance to review everything, to digest everything, to write about everything, and probably even was able to take a couple of days off to recharge the batteries after what was a very busy NHL Draft 2024 week. Speaking of which, our NHL Draft coverage of 2024 live from Vegas, when we brought you podcasts there on the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday, and the Saturday, was brought to you by Betway, a leading global online betting and gaming brand. Follow your gut instinct. Go with Betway. Go on betway.com or scan the QR code to join the action. Must be 18 years old and play responsibly. Without further ado, let's bring him in from The Athletic. Scott Wheeler, how are you?
I'm doing well. Didn't quite get the time off that you were hinting at. That's around the corner. This is actually my final week of work. So
is that right?
This time tomorrow, I will be on the golf course for my wife's birthday. We're gonna go golfing, just the two of us without the kids. And then after that, I'm unplugging for 3 weeks and returning at the end of July 31st. I'm back in action for the World Junior Summer Showcase down in Plymouth, which will be a lot of fun. Canada's returning to the World Junior Summer Showcase this year to play against Sweden and USA and Finland. So really looking forward to that.
I'm glad that you mentioned the event and that you're going to be there, to give people an idea, and they're going to find out in just a second if they didn't know already, of how much homework goes into all of your terrific analysis for The Athletic. How many events do you cover during a year?
It's a lot. I mean, every major event on the prospect calendar. So U18 Worlds, Frozen Four, Memorial Cup, CHL Top Prospects Game, All-American Game south of the border. Used to be called the BioSteel All-American Game. Now it's the Chipotle All-American Game. College games, OHL games. I was at St. Andrews College this year to watch Dean Letourneau play. World Juniors, you name it, I'm in the rink for it. I'm very lucky to have a dedicated travel budget at The Athletic. So I probably spend, in a 12-month span, I probably spend 3 months sort of on the road, 3-4 months on the road.
Wow.
Obviously U18 Worlds and the World Juniors, that's a month right there, because each of those are a couple of weeks. But it's it's a serious thing. It's time away from the family. I got 2 young kids at home. It's a busy schedule, and we don't get the typical breaks, as I always tell people in the prospect world. Obviously, the World Junior Summer Showcase in the summer, when people are normally taking vacation. After that, you've got the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. On Christmas Day, I'm normally flying to the World Juniors. So it's a bit of a unique schedule, but wouldn't change it for anything. Best job in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Pretty cool. Dean Letourneau, nice young man. We actually arrived at the airport. We met at the airport in Vegas. So we crossed paths with him, exchanged a few words. Very, very polite young man, very nice young man, comes from a good family. His father, salt of the earth, and was staying at the same hotel that I was staying at. So we crossed paths a couple of times, and would have been nice if he would have ended up being a Montreal Canadien, because of course they ended up with pick number 21. But a couple of picks later, he ends up with the Boston Bruins, which I have a feeling they're going to appreciate him a lot. And while we're talking, we're going to start with Dean, but since you brought him up, I mean, what are the Boston Bruins getting in Dean Letourneau?
Yeah, a very unique player. Obviously, 6'6", 6'7" for a forward these days is basically unheard of. You can probably count on one hand the number of players who've played at that height. Certainly, guys like Blake Wheeler and Mikko Rantanen and the Stahl brothers have played at 6'4", 6'5". Obviously, Boyle was
Brian Boyle. Brian Boyle.
Yeah, Boyle, Kevin Hayes. There's been some guys that have played sort of in that range, but Tage Thompson's obviously the big one in the NHL right now. A very unique player in that Dean isn't the power forward type. Like, he's not the big, and I'm sure you got that sense even just chatting with him. He's not the big, mean, physical, punishing player that I think people want that kind of player to be. His game is all about the skating piece. He's an exceptional athlete for a 6'6" kid. Was a really high-end lacrosse player at SAC, played a ton of other sports growing up, shocked people with his performance at the NHL Combine in Buffalo. Just a really, really great athlete, great skater for his size, and his game's really about the finesse skills. One of the criticisms of Dean this year was actually that he didn't play harder, that he wasn't more physical, that he wasn't the power forward. His game is very much about the playmaking, the shot. He's worked hard on his one-timer. He's got a ton of skill and touch on the puck for a player his size. That's his game. I think he's going to learn to sort of come into his body a little bit more in college at Boston College. They actually coincidentally have recently had Jack McBain, who kind of followed a similar path to the NHL as Dean, and similar sized player. So they've got experience at BC with that coaching staff. Now that Jerry York has retired, they've got a young coaching staff that does a really good job with those kids. He's a fabulous player, just a very rare player type. I think that's why teams got excited about him in the first round. I know there were other teams prepared to take him immediately after Boston. There were actually 3 or 4 teams that were zeroed in on him in that sort of 20s range, and he's a very unique talent. I'm fascinated to see what he's going to look like at BC both next year and beyond.
Awesome stuff. We wish him all the best. I want to bring up the Montreal Canadiens picks. We have a graphic here with all of their selections. All right, okay, and starting, of course, with their first round pick, number 5 overall, much talked about, Ivan Demidov.
Yeah, I mean, the week of the draft, I wrote an article at The Athletic making the case for Ivan Demidov as the second best prospect in this draft class. I still believe that. Coincidentally, they got the kids who were ranked 2 and 15 on my board at 5 and 21. I thought they knocked it out of the park on day one. I wrote as much in my sort of winners and losers piece that I do, ranking all 32 teams. I thought they were one of the winners of this year's draft, if only off of that day one. We can get into some of the other kids, and I'm happy to talk about any of them. But Demidov and Hage are special in terms of the range that they were taken in. I think Demidov has an opportunity to be a point per game, lead a team in scoring type of player in the NHL. I think he has an opportunity to make $8 to $10 million a year, that kind of a player. I think he's a star. He is the most purely skilled player in this class, Macklin Celebrini included. Just pure puck skill I'm talking about. He's one of the most talented one-on-one individual creators that I've scouted in 11 years of doing this now. This last draft was my 11th draft doing this. I can count on one hand the number of players who had the pure puck skill that Ivan Demidov does. Certainly Will Smith of a year prior was pretty close in terms of his ability to make guys miss, to play with the puck on his stick, to be a one-on-one offensive talent. Beckett Seneke and Trevor Connolly in this class are also high-end in that regard. But I think Demidov is even a cut above Seneke and Connolly in terms of that pure puck skill. And then on top of that, everybody saw him down in Fort Lauderdale at the Gold Star camp that they hosted pre-draft. He looked immediately to people like a really solid kid. I think people were actually a little bit surprised, not by the height thing that went viral and everybody was talking about, but actually more importantly, just how physically mature he looked. He's already a very strong kid. He's 190 plus pounds. He's got a B game. It's not all about the skill. He'll work and get pucks back. He gets up and under sticks. He tracks. He forechecks. There's a lot to like. I think outside of him maybe not being a center, he kind of checks every box that you're looking for in a top 5 pick. He's a high-end talent, and I think he really changes the ceiling. I think he really changes the ceiling for the Canadiens as a franchise in terms of what this group is going to be capable of. I've got a lot of time for Slavkovsky and Suzuki and Caulfield, but I think he's got a chance to really elevate that top 6 and give it another star. And I think they really, really needed that, especially after taking a number of defensemen, obviously quite high in recent years. So he felt like the perfect fit for me. I thought it was a sort of match made in heaven, if you will.
It doesn't sound like you were very worried about the fact that he played in the MHL last year and not the KHL. And it doesn't sound like it would have scared you from taking him if you were the Canadiens, or even if you were the Blackhawks at number 2 overall, because like you said, you had him at number 2 on your list.
Yeah, look, I mean, he didn't play as much in the KHL as I think everybody would have hoped. But in the pro hockey that we did see him play this year, or last year now it is, I thought he looked really good. He had 9 points in 7 exhibition games in the KHL preseason. 4 of those were KHL exhibition. 3 of those were in the Sochi Open, which is a sort of tournament between 3 KHL clubs and the U25 Russian team. In those 7 games, I thought he was excellent. He actually earned a spot on the KHL team out of camp this season, won a spot over Matvei Michkov, who was obviously a top 10 pick, but was taken 7th overall a year prior, and is also one of the most talented players, young players in the sport. And then he got injured in the fall, and I think he actually would have played more pro hockey in the second half of the season had he not injured his knee and missed some time. Then he comes back, and it was, I think, the right call for him to just finish the year in the MHL, dominate that league. He was a back-to-back MVP in that league. There is a case to be made that the level in that league has been watered down over the years. They've added a lot of teams. They've got teams in multiple other countries now. The league is bigger than it used to be when Nikita Kucherov was playing in it, for example, or Artemi Panarin was playing in it, or Kirill Kaprizov was playing in it. It's a little bit of a weaker league now than it was then. In saying that, though, when that weaker competition was weeded out by the playoffs, he was still the best player in the league by a wide margin in the MHL playoffs. He was unfortunately injured in the MHL finals, but still led the MHL playoffs despite being injured in Game 4. Still led the MHL playoffs in scoring. He was an utterly dominant player. He had one of the best, regardless of what you think about the league, he had one of the best draft eligible seasons in the history of the MHL, arguably the best for a player his age. I still think he's a special talent. Yeah. I think had he played at U18 Worlds or the World Juniors, I think that only would have strengthened his case. People used it as a knock against him because we hadn't seen him in those settings, but I think he would have dominated those levels. I think he would have torched even the World Juniors as an underager this year. I think that's the kind of talent we're talking about.
You brought up Michkov's name. Many criticized the Canadiens for not going with Michkov last year and actually selecting defenseman David Reinbacher. Knowing everything that you know, if I told you, Scott Wheeler, you can have one of Michkov or Demidov, who and why?
Well, coincidentally, next week, a few days from now, I'll have my top 100 drafted prospects ranking out. So you'll have the answer to that question. I'll say this. They're back-to-back on the list. They're neck and neck for me. I think you can make a case in either direction. I think they're 2-3 after Macklin Celebrini in the world of prospects right now. I think I lean Michkov, if only because I think Michkov has sort of more of a killer instinct offensively in terms of his ability in a split second to break a game open. Demidov does it more with the puck on his stick. He'll have dancing sequences and sort of more highlight reel sequences, if you will, than Michkov. But Michkov's an assassin inside the offensive zone when the puck does get to him. It just happens maybe a little bit quicker. It doesn't happen over the prolonged sequences that you see Demidov create. But I could go either direction. I think Demidov's going to be a more well-rounded player. I'm not sure whether he's quite going to have the counting stats that we're going to see Michkov put up, including beginning next year in Philadelphia. I'm very, very excited to watch him next year. And I think Michkov's one of the Calder Trophy favorites for next season.
Scott, it didn't take too long for me to be in Vegas to actually hear that the Canadiens were absolutely in love with Michael Hage, so much so that on the first day of round one on the Friday, the Canadiens pulled off a trade with the Los Angeles Kings, who were staying in the same hotel as them, early in the morning, give or take at around, I don't remember what it was. Anyway, it was early in the morning. And the Canadiens traded pick 26, 57, and 198 to Los Angeles in 2024. And moved up in the draft and got Los Angeles as pick 21. And I did a report and I said, keep an eye out on Michael Hage, because if he's available, he's a guy that the Canadiens really, really like for several reasons. And like you said, you had him a number 15 on your list. I also heard they like Sasha Boisvert a lot too. Who did you have higher up on your list, Hage or Boisvert?
I had Hage higher than Boisvert.
Yeah.
I had Boisvert around where the Canadiens were, sort of in that 20 to 25 range all year, and I had Hage sort of around 15 all year.
I saw him last week at the Habs development camp. What a terrific skater, Michael Hage. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant skater. He was one of the best skaters in this age group. Fascinating story. I spent a lot of time getting to know him this year and did a big feature at The Athletic on everything he has been through with the loss of his father, with his knee surgery a year ago in his 16-year-old season. Wonderful kid. Got to know his mom, Rania, ran into her at the Sphere, and got to share a bit of a moment with Rania at the Sphere. Great family. Just a wonderful family. I actually ran into Rania at the airport earlier this year. I was headed on a flight out of the island in Toronto here to go down to the CHL Top Prospects game in Moncton, and she was headed in the other direction to go to Montreal, where she works, coincidentally. So they've got family in Montreal. She does a lot of business in Montreal. Just unbelievable player, unbelievable people. I'm a big believer in Michael as a player. He's not just the skating piece. He's got natural size. He's going to continue to fill out his frame because of the knee surgery he had. It stunted his development a little bit. He got off to a bit of a slow start in his draft year. This is a kid who was going to be a first, second, or third overall pick kind of thing into the OHL draft before he decided to go the Chicago Steel to Michigan University. Or University of Michigan route. He's got quick hands. He can shoot it. He can pass it. I've seen him bowl guys over physically. Teams did want to see him sort of show himself better defensively and commit to the defensive side of the puck a little bit more this year, but I'm not worried about that at all, frankly. I think he's a competitive kid. I think we're going to see that over the course of the next couple of years. And I think he's got a real opportunity to become a second-line center in the NHL. And if not a second-line center, then a second-line winger. So if they get a first-liner out of Demidov and a second-liner out of Hage, that completely changes the complexion and makeup of that roster. I think it elevates that roster. And I'm a big believer in Michael. He's one of my favorite prospects in this year's draft.
A lot of Canadiens fans were happy to see the Canadiens draft Aatos Koivu, obviously. His dad, Saku, was captain of the Montreal Canadiens for about a decade and was, loved in Montreal. But talk to us about Aatos. We heard he's a little bit of a late bloomer.
Yep.
What kind of player can he be?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a riser this year. Wasn't a big part of the Finnish age group coming up. Didn't really play for them at the international level. And when he did, he played a limited role. Then this year, he was a huge part of that team across 3 different events. Was a sort of top 6 guy for them, really emerged, played well at the Fall 5 Nations, performed well at the junior level in Finland. Really well-rounded player. He's got an NHL shot, sort of natural release in motion. You'll see him score some goals, but he also just works, well-rounded skill, decent skater. I'm not sure what he is at the next level, and that was part of the reason I was maybe a little bit lower on him. I had him more as a 4th-round guy than a 3rd-round guy. I mean, it's at that range in the draft. It's more about preference, so I understood the pick, not knocking the pick. He belonged about in that range. But it became a really well-liked guy for scouts this year, despite not having maybe a dynamic quality. I'm not sure whether he's going to be a checker. I'm not sure whether he's going to be a skill guy. That's sort of what he's going to have to figure out. What's his identity? What's his role? But at his age group and against his peers, his role is as a second-line guy with that Finnish age group. He's impactful. He can play center. He can play wing. Sort of does it all. That coaches like him, that kind of a player. So could become a piece of the puzzle. And I wouldn't be shocked even if he doesn't become a piece of the puzzle at the NHL level. He's the kind of kid who will be a very good AHL player and sort of solid organizational depth.
Scott, it's much talked about in Montreal since the draft, but the Canadiens didn't draft any Quebec-born players. I believe the number out of the Q was about 15 players out of about 225 that were drafted.
It was a tough year.
The Q says that it was a difficult year in terms of the draft class, nothing to do with the league, more so it so happened to be that way with the age group. Were there players out of the Q, when you take a look at where the Canadiens picked, that the Canadiens probably should have been on?
Not really. As you kind of alluded to, just a weaker class than normal. I would expect that it bounces back next year. They've got, frankly, I'm putting together my very, very early list ahead of the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. I always have my first list of the season after the Hlinka is over. And there could be 3 or 4 Q picks in the first round next year, certainly closer to double digits in the top 2 or 3 rounds. A much better year. This was just a down year. The one player that everybody was excited about coming in after his performance last summer was Maxime Massé. Maxime, over the course of the season, though, there were just questions about his pace and his skating, a belief amongst some scouts that he doesn't play with enough pace and enough speed to project. I was higher on Massé. I actually had Massé as a first round sort of rating on my list. He was in the sort of late 20s, early 30s on my list. So he's maybe one kid that I would have been higher on than most. I am a believer, honestly, in Justin Poirier, despite the sort of 5'7", 5'8" listing. It's not every day you see a kid score 69 goals in Q combined between the regular season and the playoffs. I think he's got a real opportunity, Justin, to continue to score up levels. He's going to have to prove it up levels. I expect he'll get an entry-level contract. I expect he'll score in the AHL, and it's about can he at that size find a role and survive defensively at that size. So there were some players. I liked Alexis Bernier, who made a really, really strong push in the second half of this season to become a mid-round pick. Alexis was excellent on a good Baie-Comeau team that kind of surprised some people in the QMJHL playoffs with their run to the Q final. Poirier was obviously the leading scorer on that team as well. So there were some guys, but no can't miss guys out of the Q this year. I think you'll see a better group next year with Caleb Desnoyers. I really like Alex Huang. Emile Guiquet. Like there are some players next year in next year's draft that I'm more excited about.
All right. Okay. Let's continue to take a look at some Canadiens players. If we can bring up that graphic. All right. Logan Sawyer, Owen Protz, Tyler Thorpe, Mikas Vekvaneks. I always have a hard time saying that. Men Merrill, Makar Cannon, and Rasmus Bergqvist. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so Sawyer's are really interesting. Scored a ton in the AJHL to start this year. Then Brooks gets moved from the AJHL midseason, and obviously this made news, but the several teams from the AJHL moved into the BCHL, sort of broke up junior A hockey in Canada as we know it. Different landscape in the BCHL, higher competition, continued to score there. He's a Providence commit who's got some real offensive feel for the game, can shoot the puck, can make plays. The big knock against Logan all year was the skating. His knees kind of knock. He rides his inside edges. If you were at development camp or you saw him on the ice there, he just kind of looks a little awkward out there. I think some of that will come. I've spoken to some people around him. I think there's the expectation that with a little muscle and sort of growing into his body as a man a little bit, that the skating might actually strengthen and sort of straighten out, if you will. But a worthwhile project like the pick, was in consideration for my list, was a kid that I highlighted in my honorable mentions piece that I do every year at The Athletic. And I thought the range there was fine. Tyler Thorpe's an interesting one, an overager. The Canadiens have not, if you look back at their last few drafts, have not shied away from taking overagers. It's clearly a market inefficiency that they think they can tap into. Tyler had a really, really strong year with the Vancouver Giants this year, was a first pairing defenseman for them, was one of the better D in the WHL this season. He dealt with a little bit of an injury in the fall, which limited his sample size in his post-draft season, but was a worthwhile pick, the kind of kid that I think belongs on a draft board in the range that they took him. Ben Merrill's an interesting one. Big center out of St. Sebastian's. Played a couple of games, if I recall correctly, with the Chicago Steel this year. He's a Harvard commit who I believe is going to play for the Penticton Vs in the BCHL next year. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe he's playing for Penticton next year.
Yeah.
Big kid who showed some skill at the prep school level for St. Sebastian's. St. Sebastian's does have a little bit of a track record now of developing maybe not NHL players, but at least NHL prospects.
Will Smith was there, was he not? Was Will Smith there?
Will Smith was there, yeah. A lot of the Boston kids play there pre-NTDP. Yeah, absolutely. Jaden's a great story out of. Actually, I think Jaden was at Kimball Union with. I could be wrong. Anyways, but yeah, it's all of the. I liked all of those picks. I thought Owen Protz was high of that group that you just listed off. Owen was a good player on Brantford and came along quickly, and he can skate and he's got some size and he's a big, heavy kid. But I think he's going to have a lot of work to do just to get signed to an entry-level contract kind of thing. So Protz of that group, like I like Sawyer, I like Thorpe, I like Merrill. I mean, Mikus, he's a Latvian goalie. I didn't spend much time on him this year, but goalies at that range are always a bit of a lottery swing. Bergqvist is an interesting one, was really tiny a year ago, and I believe is now like 6'2", 6'3", so had a big growth spurt. Just a bit of a swing there on a kid who's changed very quickly over time and might be able to settle into his new frame. So I liked what they did the rest of the draft. I don't think they maybe knocked it out of the park in rounds sort of 3 through 7, but they picked a bunch of kids from my board, a bunch of kids that I'd spent a lot of time on and got to know, kids who I see in the ranges that they took them in as worthwhile picks. But I really think what's going to define this group is the Demidov and Hage picks at the top.
Yeah. By the way, I think we both got it right for Jaden Struble, who I think went from St. Sebastian's to Kimball Union, and then from there to Northeastern. If memory serves me well. All right. Okay. So you gave the Canadiens a great grade for round 1. You give them an A?
Yeah, I think they get an A as on the whole. Frankly, day one's probably an A+, and the draft as a whole was probably an A.
Oh, that's amazing stuff. All right. Why don't we take a look at round 1? Let's take a look at round 1. All right. There you have it. Celebrini, Levshunov, Seneca, Lidstrom, Demidov, Tija Ginla, Yakimchuk, Berkeley Catton, Zane Perek, and Anton Siliev are the top 10 that went in the draft. What do you make of this? Because I even heard this in Vegas. Some people looking at Levshunov and saying, I'm not so sure about his birth year. I'm not so sure about that passport. Would you be willing to go that far? Have you heard stuff like this?
Well, his coaching staff at Michigan State actually joked. I went to East Lansing in the fall and did sort of an embed story where I spent 3 or 4 days around the program and really got to know and told a bunch of stories about those kids. But the main reason that I was there was for a big feature that I did on Levshunov. And NHL clubs actually asked staff at Michigan State and Michael Leone, the former head coach, who's now the head coach in Rochester in the AHL, but was the head coach of the Green Bay Gamblers when he was there in the USHL. All of those people got asked questions about his age, and specifically because...
Did I lose you?
Specifically... Oh, did you lose me here?
I think I lost you. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, there we go. I hadn't heard you anyway, we're all good now.
Yeah, no, it was a question that they got. Staff at Michigan State and at Green Bay were asked and told me as much, that they were asked by NHL clubs about his age. And I think the reason for that is you meet the kid in person, and he's a man. Like, he is one of the most physically developed kids at that age that I've ever seen. Certainly Aaron Ekblad was another that comes to mind as a kid who looked like he was just a man. Colby Barlow from 2 years ago is another one who kind of looked that way. But Artie, like, he pops out of his shirts. He's got a huge chest. He's a physically like ripped, big kid. He's got the hairline, like he's losing some of his hair, and he's got the hairline that I have. So there were questions about it, but I think he's just a big kid. Like, you actually meet him and you get to know him, and you learn pretty quickly that he is a kid. Like, there's not that he's immature, but he's got sort of kid sort of presence about him.
Yeah.
And I think he still has a lot of growing up to do off the ice in terms of just sort of figuring things out in North America. His game also sort of feels a little raw in terms of decision making and that kind of thing. Part of that is that he's played in Belarus, which is frankly a terrible, terrible level until just 2 years ago. He's only spent 2 years in North America, so I think that's going to come. But Artie's a tremendous player. Like Artie and Demidov were 2-3 on my board all year. They kind of bounced back and forth between second and third. I actually had Letourneau at second on my list for longer this season than I had Demidov there, even though Demidov finished at number 2 on my board. I think Artie's a stud. I think he's going to be the sort of number 1 or number 2 D of the future in Chicago.
A couple of days ago, Alain Chenet, former head scout of the Anaheim Ducks, who was a scout for them for about 20 years, said to me that Martin Madden Jr. really loves to draft based on potential, ceiling. And you'd have to think that he loves Beckett Seneca's potential. There are a lot of independent scouts who didn't even have Seneca in their top 10. But his second half of the season was much talked about and much documented. Here's a guy who in the last 2 years went from 5'10" to 5 foot to 6'3.5". He obviously still has to fill out on that frame. You talked about how good his hands are and how good his skill set is. Was this pick worth it at 3?
It was a little high for me, if only because I am a big believer in a player like Ivan Demidov. But he was, after Demidov was off the board, Beckett would have been right in every conversation for me in terms of Beckett versus Caden Lindstrom, or Beckett versus TJ Ginla, or Beckett versus Berkeley Catton, or Zane Parekh, or Zeev Boyum. All those guys kind of fit into that same sort of cluster for me after Letourneau and Demidov on my board. Yeah. Now, I was a little bit lower on Beckett. Beckett's a really, really interesting sort of case study. You mentioned the size and the growth spurt piece of it. He's got skill that it's unconventional for a 6'3" winger. Just dynamic one-on-one skill. But there are questions about him. He was healthy scratched and benched early on this season. Early on this season, I had people around the OHL, GMs and coaches, when I was polling people early in the season about some of the top prospects in the league, tell me that they weren't sure he was a first-round pick. He really struggled. He played a lot of one and done hockey, as hockey people will call it, sort of stick handling himself into trouble, turning pucks over, bad habits, that kind of a thing. And then in the second half, he just, as you alluded to, he just took off. Like he was on a rocket ship, if you will, especially pre-injury. He was injured in the OHL playoffs, but he was a leading reason for an Oshawa Generals team that was actually building for next year. They wanted to contend next year. A leading reason for them surprising some people and making it all the way to the OHL final. Obviously, they lost to London without Beckett in the lineup, but Beckett got them there in a lot of ways and made some big-time plays in big-time moments, scored some highlight reel goals on top defensemen. He's a dynamic talent, and I think they saw that skill level with the now 6'3" frame. It's a pretty exciting package. And I think on top of that, if you were to look, I sort of reported that Seneke could be the pick earlier in the week there in Vegas for Anaheim. And I think part of the reason for that was that I started to have people around the league look at their prospect pool and sort of tell me that they need a right shot winger. Like it was kind of the one thing that they've got a ton at left shot up front. They've got a great depth down the middle with Mason McTavish and Leo Carlson, and you go down the list, Nathan Gaucher. But they didn't have that sort of premium right shot winger. So he also kind of filled a need for them.
Caden Lindstrom obviously was too big of a package for Columbus to actually pass up on. They probably looked at him and said, this is the preeminent power forward in the draft class. We have to take him. He's been compared to Quinton Byfield. My buddy George Larac said this guy's the next Eric Lindros. That seems a little bit strong. And if he will be, man, that's going to be quite the hockey player. But do you think Columbus, when all is said and done, will regret not taking Demidov?
No, I think the only reason they regret it is if Lindstrom's back becomes a lingering issue. That was the question with Lindstrom heading into the draft. I've spent a lot of time speaking to the people around him about it. I did a big story on his back and where it's at. I'm pretty convinced, based off of what I've been told, that he's going to be fine, that he's going to be healthy. I think we might even see him in a few weeks at the World Junior Summer Showcase for Canada, which will be great to see him back on the ice and healthy again after missing so much time in the second half. I'm excited about Caden. Do I think he's a better prospect than Demidov? No. But Caden's a legit talent. I actually think the best comp for him isn't Quinton Byfield, but it's actually Adam Fantilli, who's already in Columbus.
Wow, look at that, yeah.
They're two 6'3" kids who can absolutely fly. They're both competitors. They're both physically engaged. They've both got quick twitch hands. They can both shoot and score the puck. They're both maybe not the most cerebral playmakers. There are a lot of lines to draw between Adam Fantilli and Caden Lindstrom. Now, I think Adam Fantilli is a better prospect than Caden Lindstrom, but I don't think there's some huge gap between the two players, especially if Caden can get healthy and get back to looking like the player that he looked like in the front half of last season, which was frankly a complete force. Caden was viewed as a late first-round pick coming into last year, and within a couple of months of play had completely changed it and gone from late first to top 5 consideration. So, and obviously even went top 5 after missing half of the season, which speaks to that cachet that he built for himself. So I think if your 1-2 punch is Adam Fantilli and Caden Lindstrom down the middle, that's an enviable 1-2 punch. They kind of look, both of those kids, exactly like teams want their centers to look.
3 or 4 very quick ones, okay? Some people say, well, Canadiens got a great talent in Demidov, but you win in the playoffs with guys like Iginla, and they probably should have taken Teach. Yes or no?
No, I disagree. I think Demidov's B game is not all that different from Teach's. Certainly Teach has a little bit more jump to his game, a little bit more jam to his game, if you will, but both of them are well-rounded wingers. I don't think Teach, despite his listing as a center by NHL Central Scouting, is going to be a center. I think Teach Iginla is a winger all day for me, and I think Demidov's the more talented prospect.
Will Berkeley Catton be a star in the National Hockey League, 8th pick overall to Seattle, signed his entry-level contract the way he was a star in the WHL?
I think he's got an opportunity. It's obviously always a little bit tougher as a 5'10" center to continue to play that style. But Berkeley is one of the best skaters in this age group, one of the more talented players in this age group. He added the goal scoring to his arsenal in a big way this year. People, I think, don't even realize that he scored 50 plus in the WHL this year. When they talk about him, he's never talked about as a scorer. I think he's a dynamic, skating, talented player who's going to be a big part of the future in Seattle.
Did Minnesota get a steal with Zeev Boehm at 12, or did he end up where you thought he would be?
Absolutely. I think Zeev is right up there with Ivan and Hage as among my favorite picks of the entire draft. Zeev was 4th on my list. He was my 2nd-ranked defenseman after Artem Levshunov. I think Zeev Boehm is a star in the making. He had the best college season by a defenseman that I've ever watched, and that includes Charlie McAvoy, Owen Power, Zach Werenski, Luke Hughes, Quinn Hughes. Better college freshman year than all of those kids. Impacted play in all areas. 50-point season offensively, locked the best players in the country, including Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, locked them up on the biggest stage in the Frozen Four. I think Zeev's a stud, and I think he's an unbelievable pick at 12.
Will Cole Yzerman score goals at the National Hockey League level the way he was able to do it with the U.S. National Development Program? That's the last one for you.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think he's going to score them with the ease that he did against his peers, but I think he's going to score a ton of goals in the NHL. I think he's the top goal scorer in this draft. I think he lingered longer than he should have on that basis. I think he was over-scouted and over-criticized over the last couple of years with the big players, the big-name players that everybody sees, especially at the program where they see them 30, 40 times a year, many scouts. It becomes easier to nitpick them than to look back on sort of what makes them special. I don't think he's Oliver Wahlstrom, which is a comparison that's been used a lot. Obviously, Wahlstrom was also an Islanders pick and never sort of worked out. I think Cole Yzerman's a much better scorer at this age than Oliver Wahlstrom ever was. I think he'll be a much better scorer in the NHL. He may not be the best 5-on-5 player in the NHL offensively, but the power play is still a big part of the game, and I think we often knock kids who are power play merchants more than we should. He is going to be a lethal power play player in the NHL. He's going to play at the top of the lineup offensively, and I think he's going to hit.
Scott Wheeler of The Athletic, this was a treat as always, and it's not easy to get a hold of you because everybody wants you, and I'm so glad that you were with me tonight on the Sick Podcast. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thanks, Tony. Sorry we couldn't link up. I know we've been playing phone tag here over the last couple of months.
They say it's better late than never. Thank you,
Yes.
Scott. There you have it. Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. Special thanks to Energy Transportation Group, to Bittt, Tibi, to Playground, and to Betway. Special thanks to all of you watching. Comment SICK, S-I-C-K. Like and share with your friends. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple. It's our way of feeling the love. For Shane Gamo and Master Control, I'm Marinaro.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different. LaVie.tv, embrace your true nature. And Playground, your premier gaming destination.